The year was 1968, and America was in the midst of cultural upheaval. Every week, millions tuned in to the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS, a variety show like no other. It wasn't afraid to tackle the taboo with sharp political satire and edgy commentary on topics like the Vietnam War and religion. For a younger, rebellious audience, it was the voice of a generation, and it became a launching pad for emerging acts that reflected the counterculture spirit of the 1960s. One such act was a young, clean-cut comic named George Carlin. But this wasn't the George Carlin we would come to recognize. Back then, he was polished and wholesome, wearing a crisp blue suit, short hair neatly combed, and no hint of the sharp-edged social commentator he would later become. Carlin made people laugh, sure, but he hadn't yet found his voice. That transformation was still to come. Over the years, Carlin would evolve from a traditional entertainer into one of the most groundbreaking, controversial, and unapologetic comedians of all time. He became a voice for those questioning authority, a champion of free speech, and a comedic icon who changed the rules of stand-up forever. This is the story of how George Carlin redefined comedy, and how he turned his own rebellion into a legacy. George Carlin's story begins in the bustling heart of New York City, where he was born on May 12, 1937. His early years were anything but idyllic. Carlin came into the world in Morningside Heights, a neighborhood that would become both a playground and a proving ground for the young boy with big dreams. His family life was turbulent, marked by a volatile father who struggled with alcoholism and eventually left the picture. Raised by his mother, Mary, Carlin grew up in a small apartment with his older brother, often left to his own devices while his mother worked long hours to support the family. For young George, comedy became an escape, a way to find joy in an otherwise challenging environment. He immersed himself in the humor of the times, idolizing icons like Bob Hope, Jack Benny, and Milton Berle. Mad Magazine became a treasured source of inspiration, feeding his sharp wit and love of satire. Even as a child, Carlin had a knack for performance, entertaining his mother and her friends with impressions, dances, and jokes. It was clear early on, this kid was born to be on stage. As Carlin entered his teenage years, his rebellious streak became more pronounced. School was a struggle. He clashed with authority, detested rules, and found little interest in traditional education. Despite this, he discovered his natural talent for entertaining others. In the classroom, he quickly became the resident clown, using humor to win over peers and distract from his academic struggles. But his pranks and antics often landed him in trouble. Carlin's relationship with formal education was short-lived. By the time he turned 16, he had had enough. He dropped out of high school, a decision that, while risky, perfectly aligned with his aversion to conformity. After leaving school, Carlin sought a path that would take him far from the constraints of his upbringing. At 17, he joined the United States Air Force, eager for a fresh start and a chance to see the world. He was stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he worked as a radar technician. While the military provided structure, it didn't exactly suit Carlin's free-spirited nature. He frequently found himself in hot water for insubordination and breaking rules. He even admitted later that his salute probably didn't meet the military standards. However, his time in the Air Force wasn't without its benefits. It was during these years that Carlin stumbled upon his first love, radio. He began working part-time at KJOE, a local station in Shreveport, Louisiana, where he was given the chance to read promos and substitute as a DJ. The microphone became his new stage, and the experience planted the seeds for what would eventually become a groundbreaking comedy career. Carlin's disdain for authority often got the better of him. He was court-martialed 3 times and racked up a long list of disciplinary actions. Yet, despite his rebellious nature, he managed to receive a general discharge in 1957, officially closing his chapter with the military. By this point, Carlin had a clear vision. He wanted to perform. The military wasn't the right stage, but it had given him a taste of what it felt like to entertain and connect with an audience, even if that audience was just a small group of listeners tuning into a late-night radio show. After his discharge, Carlin knew he needed to find a way to turn his passion for performance into a career. His time in the Air Force had given him the confidence to pursue his dreams, but now he had to figure out where he truly belonged. What followed was a journey of trial and error, filled with small victories and plenty of setbacks. But one thing was certain: George Carlin was just getting started. After his Air Force discharge, George Carlin turned his sights toward radio, a medium he'd grown to love during his time as a DJ in Louisiana. His next stop was Boston, where he landed a short-lived job at Wheezy. Unfortunately, Carlin's carefree attitude got the best of him, and he was fired after taking the station's news van to New York without permission. But fate intervened when Carlin moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and crossed paths with a fellow radio personality named Jack Burns. Burns shared Carlin's passion for comedy, and the two quickly bonded over their shared ambition to make people laugh. Recognizing their potential as a duo, Carlin and Burns began experimenting with a double act. By 1960, they had relocated to Hollywood, the heart of the entertainment industry, to chase their dreams. While working as morning DJs for K-Day, the pair honed their comedic timing and developed routines that resonated with audiences. It wasn't long before they decided to leave radio behind entirely, focusing on stand-up comedy full-time. Their collaboration resulted in performances at nightclubs and appearances on television, culminating in the release of their album, Burns and Carlin, at the Playboy Club Tonight, recorded in 1960, but released in 1963. Though their partnership lasted only 2 years, it was a crucial stepping stone in Carlin's journey. Burns and Carlin parted ways amicably, each choosing to pursue solo careers while remaining close friends. By the early 1960s, Carlin was determined to establish himself as a solo performer. He settled in New York City, returning to his old neighborhood in Morningside Heights, where he found an apartment in the very building where he grew up. His big break came in 1962, thanks to the support of industry veterans who recognized his talent. Among them was Mort Sahl, a trailblazing comedian who helped Carlin secure a coveted spot on The Tonight Show. At the time, the show was transitioning from Jack Paar to Johnny Carson, and Carlin's appearance during this transitional period gave him the exposure he needed. Carlin's performance on The Tonight Show was a hit, showcasing his ability to craft sharp impressions and relatable humor. His impersonation of President John F. Kennedy particularly resonated with audiences and opened doors to numerous television opportunities. Soon, Carlin became a regular presence on popular programs like The Merv Griffin Show, The Mike Douglas Show, and The Kraft Summer Musical. He also continued to appear on The Tonight Show under Johnny Carson's reign, eventually making over 130 appearances throughout his career. As Carlin's television presence grew, so did his reputation as a clean, family-friendly comedian. His routines were witty and accessible, carefully tailored for the mainstream audience that dominated TV viewership in the 1960s. This approach proved successful, earning him widespread appeal and leading to the release of his first solo comedy album, Takeoffs and Put-Ons, in 1967. The album featured a collection of clever observational humor, showcasing Carlin's ability to turn everyday scenarios into laugh-out-loud moments. It was well received, further solidifying his status as a rising star in the comedy world. Despite his success, Carlin began to feel confined by the persona he had created. The tailored suits, clean-cut image, and safe material no longer reflected who he was or the direction he wanted to take his comedy. As the counterculture movement gained momentum in the late 1960s, Carlin found himself increasingly drawn to its ideals. He saw an opportunity to reinvent himself, shedding the polished image that had brought him fame in favor of a more authentic, boundary-pushing style. But that transformation was still on the horizon. For now, George Carlin was riding the wave of mainstream success, steadily building a foundation that would allow him to take comedy to places it had never been before. By the late 1960s, George Carlin had grown tired of the polished, family-friendly comedian he had become. The disconnect between his onstage persona and his true self began to weigh heavily on him. In 1969, a pivotal moment pushed Carlin to embrace change. He had been performing at the Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas, a lucrative gig that promised stability. But during one of his routines, he used the word ass, a seemingly minor offense by today's standards. The backlash was immediate, and Carlin was fired on the spot. It was a wake-up call, showing him that the safe path he had been following wasn't aligned with his evolving views and the cultural shift happening around him. Around the same time, Carlin experienced what he would later describe as a transformative moment. He began experimenting with LSD, which he credited as a catalyst for reshaping his perspective on life, art, and authenticity. This, combined with his growing disillusionment with societal norms, led him to shed the clean-cut image he had worked so hard to maintain. Out went the suits and neatly combed hair. In their place came long hair, a beard, jeans, and t-shirts. Carlin's physical transformation mirrored his newfound commitment to speaking his mind, no matter how controversial the subject. In 1972, Carlin released FM and AM, an album that perfectly captured the dichotomy of his career at that point. The AM side featured his older, clean-cut material, while the FM side showcased his newer, edgier content. The album was a hit, earning Carlin a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album. This success validated his decision to embrace the counterculture and gave him the confidence to push boundaries even further. That same year, Carlin released Class Clown, an album that marked a turning point in his career. Among its standout tracks was 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television, a routine that would become one of the most iconic and controversial bits in comedy history. The routine humorously examined the absurdity of societal taboos around language, listing 7 words deemed too obscene for broadcast. The bit was provocative, insightful, and unapologetically rebellious, encapsulating the new George Carlin. However, not everyone was ready for this version of him. Later that year, while performing at Summerfest in Milwaukee, Carlin was arrested for public obscenity after delivering the 7 words routine on stage. The incident only cemented his reputation as a fearless provocateur. Carlin didn't stop there. On his next album, Occupation Fool, he recorded a follow-up routine titled Filthy Words. This bit would inadvertently spark a legal battle that reached the highest court in the United States. In 1973, WBAI, a New York City radio station, played Carlin's Filthy Words on air. A listener, upset that his young son had heard the routine, filed a complaint with the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. What followed was a prolonged legal battle between the FCC and WBAI's owner, Pacifica Foundation, over the limits of free speech on public airwaves. The case, FCC versus Pacifica Foundation, reached the Supreme Court in 1978. The court's decision upheld the FCC's authority to regulate indecent material on broadcast media, citing the unique accessibility of radio and television to children. While the ruling imposed limits on what could be aired, it also solidified Carlin's place as a champion of free speech. His routine became a symbol of the fight against censorship, earning him both admiration and criticism. Despite the controversy, Carlin's career flourished. His willingness to challenge authority and societal norms resonated with audiences who were hungry for authenticity and rebellion. With his sharp wit, fearless commentary, and unwavering commitment to speaking the truth, George Carlin didn't just reinvent himself, he redefined comedy for generations to come. In 1977, George Carlin found a new stage that would change the trajectory of his career: HBO. The premium cable network was still in its early years, but it offered something that no other platform could: uncensored comedy. For Carlin, this was a perfect fit. His first HBO special, George Carlin at USC, aired that year, giving audiences the full Carlin experience without the restrictions of broadcast television. For the first time, he could perform his routines exactly as he envisioned them, with no compromises. This marked the beginning of a long partnership with HBO, where Carlin would go on to release 14 specials, each showcasing his sharp wit, biting commentary, and fearless approach to taboo topics. HBO became a defining platform for Carlin's career. These specials not only solidified his reputation as one of the most provocative comedians of his time, but also allowed him to build an intimate connection with audiences. Viewers could experience his performances in their purest form, unfiltered and unedited. For Carlin, HBO wasn't just a platform. It was a creative haven that allowed him to explore ideas and take risks that traditional media couldn't support. But the path to legendary status wasn't without challenges. The 1980s brought a series of health issues that tested Carlin's resilience. He suffered his first heart attack in 1978, not long after his second HBO special aired. In 1982, he endured a more serious heart attack while attending a baseball game at Dodger Stadium. The emergency led to one of the earliest uses of balloon angioplasty, a groundbreaking procedure at the time. Adding to his struggles, Carlin was involved in a car accident in 1981 that further complicated his recovery. Despite these setbacks, Carlin refused to let his health define him. Instead, he focused on his craft, returning to the stage with renewed determination, and continuing to tour and produce comedy specials that kept his voice in the cultural conversation. In addition to his stand-up career, Carlin found success in acting, a pursuit he had always been interested in. While he had minor roles in films like With Six You Get Egg Roll and Car Wash, it wasn't until the late 1980s and early 1990s that his acting career gained traction. One of his most memorable roles came in the sci-fi comedy Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where he played Rufus, the time-traveling mentor to the titular characters. The film introduced Carlin to a new generation of fans and remains one of his most iconic roles. Carlin also appeared in hit films like Outrageous Fortune and The Prince of Tides, showcasing his versatility as an actor. However, one of his most surprising roles came on the children's television series Shining Time Station, where he played Mr. Conductor, a whimsical character who narrated stories involving Thomas the Tank Engine. The role was a stark departure from his edgy stand-up persona, but it demonstrated Carlin's range and willingness to explore unexpected opportunities. Through his HBO specials, perseverance in the face of health struggles, and forays into acting, George Carlin cemented his status as a comedy legend. Whether he was delivering scathing critiques of society or playing a beloved children's character, Carlin's ability to connect with audiences and remain true to himself set him apart as one of the most influential entertainers of his generation. In the 1990s and 2000s, George Carlin showed no signs of slowing down. With each HBO special, he pushed boundaries even further, tackling the most contentious issues of the day. Politics, religion, consumer culture, and societal hypocrisy became his favorite targets. His routines were sharp, unrelenting, and brutally honest, reflecting a comedian who had mastered the art of turning outrage into laughter. Specials like Jammin' in New York, You Are All Diseased, and his final special, It's Bad for You, showcased a Carlin who wasn't just entertaining audiences. He was challenging them to think critically about the world around them. Carlin's comedy in this era wasn't for the faint of heart. His material grew darker and more cynical, a reflection of his disillusionment with society. But even as he dissected the flaws of humanity, his work resonated deeply with audiences who appreciated his willingness to speak truths others avoided. His later specials were as relevant as they were provocative, cementing his place as one of comedy's most fearless voices. Beyond the stage, Carlin found another outlet for his sharp wit: writing. In 1997, he released Brain Droppings, a book that combined his signature humor with insightful social commentary. The book became a bestseller, offering fans a new way to engage with his unique perspective. He followed it with Napalm and Silly Putty, and When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops, both of which continued his tradition of blending comedy with biting observations about modern life. Carlin's writing expanded his reach, allowing him to connect with audiences who may not have seen him perform live. These books were more than just collections of jokes. They were extensions of his worldview, delivered with the same unfiltered honesty that defined his stand-up. Despite his success, Carlin's later years weren't without challenges. In 2004, he checked into rehab to address his struggles with addiction, marking the end of decades spent relying on substances to cope with the pressures of life and work. Carlin had long been open about his relationship with drugs and alcohol, but this moment represented a turning point. It was a decision to prioritize his health, even as he continued to grapple with the demands of his career. Financial troubles also added to his challenges. Carlin faced issues with the IRS, stemming from unpaid taxes, which left him in significant debt. These struggles forced him to keep performing, even when health and age might have encouraged him to slow down. For Carlin, comedy wasn't just a passion, it was a necessity. Yet he often credited these hardships with making him a better comedian, as they kept him grounded and motivated. In his later years, Carlin's weathered appearance and sharper edge only added to his legendary status. He remained unapologetically himself, delivering performances that reminded audiences why he had become one of the most respected comedians in the world. Whether on stage or in his books, Carlin continued to dissect life with unparalleled wit and honesty, leaving behind a body of work that remains as relevant today as ever. In the final chapter of George Carlin's life, he remained as prolific and uncompromising as ever. His last HBO special, It's Bad for You, aired in 2008, just months before his death. In this final performance, Carlin delivered a masterclass in sharp, unfiltered comedy, taking aim at societal norms, human behavior, and the absurdities of modern life. The special was a fitting farewell, showcasing a comedian at the height of his craft, still as bold and thought-provoking as ever. It served as both a culmination of his career and a reminder of why Carlin had become a cultural icon. On June 22, 2008, Carlin passed away from heart failure at the age of 71. He had battled heart issues for decades, but his drive to perform never waned. Just a week before his death, Carlin had been on stage, doing what he loved most. His passing marked the end of an era, but his legacy was already firmly established. Days earlier, he had been announced as the recipient of the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, an honor that celebrated his groundbreaking contributions to comedy. In his usual style, Carlin responded to the award with humor, saying, "Thank you, Mr. Twain. Have your people call my people." Carlin's influence extended far beyond the stage. He challenged the boundaries of free speech, inspiring generations of comedians and thinkers to question authority and embrace authenticity. His routines were more than just jokes. They were profound commentaries on the human condition, delivered with razor-sharp wit and fearless honesty. Whether dissecting the absurdities of language, skewering political hypocrisies, or simply making audiences laugh until they cried, Carlin's work remains timeless. Reflecting on his career, Carlin once quoted master cellist Pablo Casals, who said, "I'm beginning to notice some improvement." For Carlin, this sentiment perfectly captured his relentless pursuit of excellence, even after decades in the spotlight. Through his comedy, writing, and unwavering commitment to free expression, George Carlin left an indelible mark on the world. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a voice for those who dared to question, laugh, and think. As his iconic routines continue to resonate with audiences, it's clear that George Carlin's legacy will endure for generations to come. George Carlin's journey was nothing short of extraordinary. From his early days as a clean-cut, suit-wearing comic to his transformation into a counterculture icon and, ultimately, a comedy legend, Carlin redefined what it meant to be a stand-up comedian. He wasn't afraid to challenge societal norms, push boundaries, and speak uncomfortable truths, all while making us laugh and think at the same time. His fearless commitment to free expression and his ability to turn sharp social commentary into art have left a legacy that continues to inspire. Carlin's work wasn't just about comedy. It was about questioning the world around us and finding humor in its absurdities. Whether you connected with his satire, his language routines, or his biting critiques of society, there's no denying his impact. Now it's your turn. What's your favorite George Carlin moment or routine? Let us know in the comments below, and join the celebration of a man who changed comedy forever.